Michael Smitherman was a janitor at one of the most secure defense facilities in the country. And for 7 years, not a single person inside that building knew that he was also one of the most dangerous men who had ever walked through its doors. He had no name tag. He kept his head down. He mopped floors and fixed pipes and went home to his daughter every evening, and nobody asked questions. But the day the command center lost contact with ground team that was about to be killed, Michael did something that a janitor should never have been able to do. And the moment he did it, the woman in charge of that facility turned white as a sheet because she recognized exactly who he was, and she knew that everything she had been hiding for 7 years was now standing in the same room as her, holding a child's backpack. Michael Smitherman was 38 years old, and his mornings were the same every single day, without exception. He woke up at 5. He made coffee. He packed a lunch for his daughter Elizabeth, who was 7 years old and very particular about the way her food was arranged. The sandwich had to be cut into triangles, not rectangles. The apple slices had to be in a separate container, so they did not touch anything else. There had to be a small note inside the lunchbox, written in his handwriting, that said something simple. That day it said, "You are the best thing I ever did." Elizabeth woke up at 6:30. She ate breakfast fast because she was always excited about school. Michael walked her to the bus stop 3 blocks away, waited on the sidewalk until the bus was out of sight, and then walked the 6 blocks to work. He had worked at Regis Defense Solutions for 6 years. His job title was Facility Maintenance Technician. His supervisor was a man named Harold who had hired him without much conversation because Michael had shown up on time, answered every question with a short, direct answer, and did not seem like the kind of person who would cause problems. Harold had been correct. In 6 years, Michael had not caused a single problem. He showed up early, stayed late when needed, fixed whatever needed fixing, and went home. Nobody talked to him much. He did not seem to want them to, and people who work in defense facilities generally understand that some people prefer not to be known. What Harold did not know, what nobody in that building knew, was that Michael Smitherman was not his real name. His real name was classified. His real background was sealed inside a file that was marked for restricted access at the highest level of government clearance. And the reason that file existed was that 7 years ago, Michael had been part of a force recon unit that ran a black operation that officially never happened. And at the end of that operation, every member of his unit was declared dead. The mission had gone wrong. People had died. The government had closed the file and moved on. Michael had not died. He had walked out of that situation with injuries that took 4 months to heal, a name that no longer existed in any system, and a 6-week-old baby girl who belonged to his teammate, whose real father had not walked out with him. He had named her Elizabeth. He had raised her alone. He had found a job in a facility that had enough security clearance requirements to make it difficult for casual government searches to cross-reference employee records, and he had spent 6 years being completely invisible, which was the one skill from his previous life that had translated perfectly into civilian existence. He was good at being invisible because he had been trained to be invisible. Force recon operators do not announce themselves. They move through environments without leaving traces. They learn to look like they belong wherever they are, to give people nothing unusual to notice or remember. Michael had done this in active combat situations in 3 countries. Doing it in a maintenance uniform in a defense facility in Virginia was, by comparison, not very difficult. The building at Regis Defense Solutions had 14 floors. The top 4 floors were restricted to personnel with level 4 clearance or higher. Michael had been inside those floors 17 times in 6 years, always for maintenance purposes, always escorted, always with specific work order attached to his key card. He had fixed a ventilation problem on the 12th floor. He had replaced ceiling panels on the 13th. He had never been inside the command center on the 14th floor until the day of the CEO's presentation. CEO Mary Jenks had called a company-wide executive meeting for 9 in the morning. The presentation was about the company's next-generation satellite targeting system, which Regis had developed under a classified government contract and was preparing to demonstrate. Every senior officer in the building was in that room. The generals who had flown in from Washington were in that room. Mary Jenks herself was at the front of the room, standing at a podium, explaining what the system could do and why it was going to change everything. Michael was on the 7th floor, replacing a broken thermostat. At 9:17, a water main on the 14th floor burst. It was a small burst, a joint failure in a supply line that ran behind the wall of the corridor just outside the command center. Water began seeping under the door. The duty officer on 14 called maintenance. Harold was at lunch. The call went to Michael. He took the elevator to 14 with his tool bag, his access override card, and no expectation that the next 90 minutes were going to be the end of the life he had built. The water was easy to stop. He sealed the joint in 11 minutes, cleaned up the water on the floor, and was packing his tools when the alarm went off. It was not the building alarm. It was a command center alarm, a specific, low-frequency tone that Michael recognized immediately, and that nobody else in the corridor seemed to understand, because they all looked confused while Michael went completely still. That tone meant a satellite communication lost during an active ground operation. He knew what that meant because he had heard it before in a very different context, and he knew that when that tone went off, there were people somewhere on the ground who had just lost their only connection to anyone who could help them. He walked to the command center door. It was propped open. He looked inside. The room had 12 workstations, 3 large screens, and approximately 20 people, most of whom were talking at the same time. The large screen showed a satellite feed that was flickering badly, the image breaking up, the data streams along the edge of the screen full of error codes. On the center screen, between the errors, there was a thermal imaging view of what appeared to be desert terrain. Michael could see 6 heat signatures moving in a coordinated pattern. He could see, at the edge of the feed before it flickered out completely, for more signatures that the 6 were moving toward from 2 different directions. The 4 signatures did not know the 6 were coming. Lieutenant Kaylin Vance was the officer at the central workstation. She was 26 years old, and she had been in her current role for 4 months. She was typing commands and getting error responses, and typing more commands and getting more error responses. And the expression on her face was the expression of someone who knows they are running out of time and does not know how to stop that from happening. Mary Jenks was standing behind her. Mary Jenks was 51 years old, former Marine colonel, current CEO of Regis Defense Solutions for 9 years. She had short silver hair and the posture of someone who had spent decades being the most senior person in the room. She was watching the screen and not saying anything, which meant she already understood that nobody in the room knew how to fix this. Michael walked in. He walked past 2 officers who did not stop him because they were not paying attention, past a workstation where someone was on the phone with what sounded like a technical support line, and up to Lieutenant Vance's station. He set his tool bag down on the floor. Vance looked up at him. She opened her mouth to tell him he was not authorized to be there. Michael held up one finger. He looked at the screens. He looked at the error codes. He looked at the communication log on the left panel, which showed the last 40 seconds of attempted contact and the specific failure points in the encryption handshake. He recognized the system architecture. It was an updated version of something he'd used years ago, and the failure mode was the same one that version had been prone to, a cascade error in the secondary relay that knocked out the primary channel and could not be fixed with a standard override, because the override pathway was part of the same relay. There was a way around it. It was not in any manual that Regis Defense Solutions had ever published, because it used a protocol that predated the current system and had been considered obsolete for almost a decade. It still worked. Michael knew it still worked because he had used it in conditions where nothing else had worked, and it had never failed him. He moved Lieutenant Vance's hands off the keyboard very gently and began to type. The room had gotten quieter in the way rooms get quiet when something unusual is happening, and people have not yet decided how to react. Mary Jenks said, "Who is that?" Nobody answered her, because nobody knew. Michael typed a sequence that took 45 seconds. The sequence reestablished the communication channel through a back route that bypassed the broken relay entirely. It was not elegant. It was a communication equivalent of breaking a window to get into a locked house. But it worked. The screen stabilized. The thermal feed came back, clear and steady. And then the voice came through the speakers. A man's voice, urgent and controlled, speaking in a format that was not standard military radio procedure. It was a contact code. A very specific, very old contact code that had been used by exactly one unit in the United States military, and that unit had been officially disbanded and erased from the record 7 years ago. The code was asking for authentication, for someone on the other end to confirm that the channel was secure and that the person receiving was who they were supposed to be. Michael looked at the transmit key for 1 second. Then he pressed it and said, "Tango Sierra Victor, Alpha Echo Niner. You have 6 tangos, 2 vectors, north and east. Break east now 30 meters. Channel secure." He released the key. On the thermal feed, the 4 signatures stopped. Then they moved, fast, clean, east, spreading apart in a train formation that created distance and angle between them and the 6 closing signatures. 30 seconds later, the 4 were through a gap in the terrain that the 6 could not cover from their current positions. The threat was broken. The 4 signatures were moving towards safety. The room was absolutely silent. Michael straightened up. He picked up his tool bag. He looked at the screens one more time to confirm the 4 signatures were clear. Then he turned around. Mary Jenks was standing 4 feet away from him. Every person in the room was looking at him. But Mary Jenks was not looking at him the way the others were, with confusion or shock or the beginning of an angry question about authorization. She was looking at him the way a person looks when they have seen a ghost, when something they buried a long time ago has just walked back into the room. Her face was white. "That code," she said. Her voice was very controlled and very quiet. "That contact authentication. That protocol." She stopped. "That unit was destroyed 7 years ago. Every member of that unit is dead." Michael looked at her and said nothing. "I wrote the final report myself," she said. Michael looked at her and said nothing. Mary Jenks turned to the room and said, in a voice that did not leave room for discussion, "Everyone out. Now, close the door." The room emptied. Lieutenant Vance was the last to leave. She looked back at Michael once before the door closed, and Michael could see that she had questions that she was going to have a very hard time not asking. Then it was just Michael and Mary Jenks. She walked to the central workstation and stood behind it with her hands flat on the desk. She was in CEO mode, the controlled, dominant presence of a person who was used to being in charge of every room she entered. But her face was still white, and her eyes were still doing the thing they had been doing since he spoke the code, which was a thing eyes do when a person is trying very hard to process something they were not prepared for. "Your name," she said. "Michael Smitherman," he said. "I'm maintenance. I fix things." "Your real name?" Michael set his tool bag down and looked at her. "My real name is in a sealed file that you wrote the report for. So you tell me what name is on it." Mary Jenks stared at him. "Sergeant First Class Daniel Reeves." She said finally, "Force Recon. Unit designation classified. Killed in action 7 years ago on a mission that this company provided logistical support for." "That's right," Michael said. "You're not dead." "No." "How?" she said. "One step at a time," Michael said. "Same way anyone survives anything." Mary Jenks walked away from the workstation. She went to the window on the far side of the room and stood with her back to him for a moment. Michael watched her and did not move. "The report I wrote said there were no survivors," she said to the window. "You wrote what you were told to write," Michael said. "I know that. I'm not here to argue about the report." She turned around. "Then what are you here for?" "Right now, I came up here to fix a water main." He looked at her evenly. "But since we're having this conversation, I've been in this building for 6 years. I know where every camera is. I know which server contains the communication logs that connect this company to the authorization chain for that mission. I know that those logs still exist because I checked 3 years ago to make sure they hadn't been deleted, because I needed to know that I had something to stand on if I ever needed to stand on something." Mary Jenks looked at him for a long time. "You've been here 6 years, she said. "You knew I was the CEO." "Yes." "And you said nothing." "I had a daughter to raise," Michael said. "I didn't need anything from you. I needed to be left alone." "Then why are you telling me now?" "Because whatever just happened on that satellite feed," Michael said, "it's not over. Whoever those 4 people are, and whoever the 6 were, and whatever's behind this, It's going to come back. And when it does, you're going to need someone who can use that relay protocol. And I'm the only person in this building who knows it. Mary Jenks looked at him for a long time. Then she said, I have a security team. I have government liaisons. You had a room full of trained officers, Michael said, and none of them could do what I just did in 45 seconds. He paused. I'm not asking for anything complicated. I'm asking you to leave my name alone, leave my daughter alone, and let me do my job, both of them, until this is resolved. After that, I go back to being maintenance. Another long silence. What do you want in return? She asked. I want you to delete the cross-reference between my maintenance file and the unit designation in your sealed report, he said. I know it exists. I know your record system linked them when the facility ran a routine security audit 4 years ago. I need that link gone. Mary Jenks studied him. And if I don't, then I give the communication log server address to someone who will know exactly what to do with it, Michael said. And everything you built here ends. It was not a threat delivered with heat. It was a statement of fact, said in the same tone Michael used when he told Harold that a pipe needed replacing. A flat, simple, certain statement about the way things were. Mary Jenks understood this. She had been a Marine colonel. She recognized the difference between a man who was bluffing and a man who had already made his decision and was simply informing you of it. Fine, she said. We have a deal. Michael picked up his tool bag. I'll need access to the communications infrastructure for the relay system. Work order basis is fine. I don't need anything that looks unusual. I'll have it arranged. And I need a phone number, he said. A direct line to you. If something comes through that relay, it's not going to wait for a meeting. She wrote a number on a notepad and tore off the page and handed it to him. He folded it once and put it in his pocket without looking at it. One more thing, she said as he walked toward the door. He stopped. The child, she said. The daughter. What's her name? Michael turned around and looked at her with an expression that answered the question without words. The expression said, That is not a subject we discuss. Elizabeth, he said, and then he walked out. 3 days after the command center incident, Michael was back to replacing thermostats. He had thought about it from every angle during those 3 days. The deal with Mary Jenks was a workable deal. She needed him more than she needed to expose him, which meant the balance of power was correct. The communication log server was real insurance. He had accessed it twice in 6 years just to confirm it was still there, and both times it had been exactly where he expected it to be, with exactly the data he expected it to contain. As long as that server existed, Mary Jenks had a very strong reason to honor their agreement. The question he had not fully answered yet was what the event on the satellite feed actually meant. Who were the 4 people on the ground? Who were the 6? And why had the relay gone down at the exact moment that contact between them was most critical? He thought about that last question the most. Relay failures happen. Systems had errors. But the timing of this failure, during an active operation, precisely when it would cause the maximum possible damage to the ground team, was not the kind of timing that happened by accident. Someone had caused that failure deliberately. Someone who knew the operation was happening, knew the relay architecture, and had the access to trigger a failure in a way that looked like a technical error. That someone was inside Regis Defense Solutions. Michael knew this the way he knew most things. Not because he had evidence yet, but because the shape of the situation made no other explanation reasonable. And knowing it meant that the deal with Mary Jenks was more complicated than it first appeared. Because if the insider was senior enough to access the relay system, they were senior enough that Mary might not even know about them. He was thinking about this on Tuesday morning when his phone buzzed. It was a direct line. Mary Jenks. The message said, Command Center. Now. He was there in 4 minutes. The room had fewer people this time. Mary Jenks was at the central workstation with Lieutenant Kalen Vance and a man Michael did not recognize, a compact, serious-looking person in civilian clothes who was introduced as Adrian Morrow, the company's head of network security. We have another problem, Mary said. She turned the center screen toward Michael. It showed a network activity log, the kind of log that recorded every access event in the facility's communication infrastructure. The log was highlighted in several places. Access events that were marked in yellow, which meant they had been flagged by the system's automated monitoring as unusual. These events, Morrow said, pointing to the highlighted sections. He was the kind of person who spoke with the precision of someone who had spent years translating technical information for non-technical people, and who had learned to be very careful about what he assumed his audience understood. 16 separate account accesses over the past 6 weeks. Each one accessing the relay management subnet. Each one lasting less than 4 minutes, always between 2 and 4 in the morning. Whose accounts? Michael asked. That's the problem, Morrow said. They belong to real employees. But the access locations don't match. Every one of these events originated from outside the building, from an external IP that routes through 3 different relay points before it reaches our system. Someone has the login credentials for 16 different employees, Michael said. Yes. And they've been using them to access the relay management system in 4-minute windows at 2 in the morning for 6 weeks. Correct. What have they been doing in those 4 minutes? Morrow pulled up another screen. This is what took us time to understand. They're not downloading data. They're not installing anything. They're making very small adjustments to the relay architecture, changes that individually look like routine calibration updates. But when you map all the changes together across the 6 weeks, he brought up a diagram. It was a network architecture map with the relay system components laid out in a web of connections. Certain connections were highlighted. The pattern they formed, when you looked at a whole, pointed like an arrow at a single component. They've been redirecting the system's failover logic, Morrow said. Every adjustment has moved the failure cascade pathway 1 step closer to triggering on demand. What happened 3 days ago, the relay failure during the satellite feed, that wasn't an accident. It was a result. 6 weeks of preparation, and then someone flipped a switch. Michael looked at the diagram for a moment. Then he said, they can do it again. Yes, Morrow said, whenever they want. The pathway is in place. The next failure will happen the moment someone sends a trigger. Can you close the pathway? We've been trying. The adjustments are too deeply embedded in the system architecture. Every time we fix one, 2 more appear. It's like, Morrow paused, looking for the right comparison. It's like trying to remove a knot from a net without unraveling the whole thing. Michael was quiet for a moment. Then he said, what's the subnet entry point? The one place in the system where all the adjustments had to pass through to reach the relay architecture. Morrow blinked. He looked at his screen. He moved through several layers of the network log. Then he stopped and looked up. There's one authentication gateway, he said. Everything that touched the relay system in those 16 access events passed through the same gateway. Who owns that gateway? Morrow looked at the screen again. It's attached to a specific user account. A senior network administrator named Thomas Briggs. He's been with the company 11 years. Has Briggs been flagged? He's the one who ran the initial audit that found the anomaly, Mary Jenks said. He brought this to me himself. Michael looked at her. So either he's clean and someone hijacked his gateway without his knowledge, or he found his own work before someone else did and wanted to be the one standing next to you when it was discovered. Mary held his gaze. I know, she said. That's why I called you. Michael looked at Lieutenant Vance, who had been standing at the edge of the conversation and listening carefully to everything. She was young, but she was not slow. He could see from her expression that she had already arrived at the same place he had. Lieutenant, he said, the ground team from the satellite feed. For signatures, desert terrain. Do you know who they are? Vance looked at Mary Jenks, who nodded. They're a special operations unit. Vance said, they're running a surveillance operation on a target that the company has been providing intelligence support for. The target is an organization. She stopped, choosing her words carefully. An organization that has been working to compromise classified defense infrastructure, including ours. The same organization that's been adjusting our relay system for 6 weeks. We believe so. And the ground team's operation, is it still active? Yes. They went dark after the relay failure, but they're still in position. We re-established contact through a backup channel, but it's unstable. If the relay goes down again, they're blind, Michael said, and whoever is watching from the other side will know it and move. Yes. Michael turned back to the network diagram. He studied it for 2 minutes without speaking. Mary Jenks and Morrow and Vance all waited. Nobody tried to fill the silence, which told Michael that all three of them were smart enough to know that the person who was most likely to find something useful in the diagram was the person looking at it, not the people around him. The gateway, Michael said finally, Briggs's gateway. It's the choke point. Everything went through it, which means if you can monitor it in real time, not the logs, real time, you'll see the trigger before it fires. We don't have the monitoring infrastructure for real-time gateway surveillance, Morrow said. I know, Michael said. I need to build it. He paused. Not on the main system. On a parallel track that runs alongside the gateway, without touching it. If whoever is using Briggs's account logs, and again, I'll see it before the system does. How long? Mary asked. 12 hours. We may not have 12 hours. Then I'll work faster, Michael said. He spent the next 11 hours in the server room on the 12th floor. Vance stayed with him for most of it, handing him tools when he needed them and asking questions when she did not understand what he was building. Michael answered the questions without explaining more than was necessary, because time was short and the answers to her questions would take longer to explain than they were worth. But Vance was quick, and she did not ask the same question twice, and by the 8th hour Michael had stopped explaining, and she was just following his lead, handing the right tool before he asked for it, catching a cable before it pulled loose, watching the monitoring screen, and calling out changes in the data streams in real time. She was a good officer. She reminded him of people he had worked with before. At 11:47 at night, the monitor he had built registered a login, Briggs's account, external IP. 2:53 in the morning, Michael picked up the direct line phone and called Mary Jenks. She answered on the second ring. What? They're in the system right now, he said. And based on the access pattern, they're not making adjustments this time. They're staging the trigger. A pause. How long? Michael watched the screen. The access events were moving faster than they had in the logs. Whoever was on the other end was not taking their time tonight. Minutes, he said. Tell Vance to get the ground team on the backup channel right now, and tell them to move to the secondary extraction point. Don't wait for my signal. He heard Mary relay the instruction. On the monitor, the access events converged on the trigger point. Michael had built one more thing into his parallel track. Not just monitoring. A circuit breaker. A simple, hardwired interrupt that could sever the gateway's connection to the relay system for exactly 90 seconds. Not a fix. Not a solution. Just enough time for the ground team to receive their evacuation instruction and begin moving before the relay went down. He waited until the trigger was one command away from firing. Then he threw the breaker. The gateway went dark for 90 seconds. Through the backup channel, in the command center one floor above, Vance was talking to the ground team. Michael could hear her voice faintly through the ceiling, calm, specific, giving coordinates and timing, and the exact route to the secondary extraction point. She did it correctly. She did it the way someone does it when they have trained for it, and are not letting fear get in the way. The ground team confirmed receipt. The gateway came back up. The relay failure triggered. The satellite feed went down. But the ground team was already moving. Michael sat in the server room and looked at the dark monitor for a moment. Then he started taking apart the parallel track system piece by piece and restoring each component to exactly the position it had been in before he started. He left no trace that the system had been modified. If Thomas Briggs checked in the morning, he would see nothing. He took the elevator back to the 14th floor. Mary Jenks was standing in the command center doorway. Vance was at the central workstation with her headset on, monitoring the backup channel. Ground team is at the secondary extraction point. Vance said, without looking up, ETA to extraction 40 minutes. Michael looked at Mary. Briggs, he said, what are you going to do about him? I'm going to have him under quiet surveillance starting tomorrow, she said. I'm not going to tip him yet. I want to see who he talks to. Michael nodded. That was the right call. What do you know about the organization the ground team is targeting? Mary looked at him for a moment. Something passed across her face. A consideration, a decision. Come back tomorrow, she said. There's something you need to know about this operation. All of it, not just the parts that are relevant to tonight. She paused. I should have told you the first day. I made a calculation that you didn't need to know yet, and I was wrong about that. Michael looked at her. Tomorrow, he said. He picked up his tool bag and went home. Elizabeth was asleep. He stood in her doorway for a moment and looked at her and then went to bed. He woke up at 5. He made coffee. He packed her lunch. He cut the sandwich into triangles. Listen, if you're still here, it means you're invested. You want to see what happens next. But here's the reality. Most people watch stories like this and scroll away without subscribing. They enjoy it, then vanish. If this story actually matters to you, if you genuinely care about how it ends, hit that subscribe button. It only takes a second. Otherwise, you'll probably forget this channel exists and miss all the other incredible stories I share. The full story took Mary Jenks an hour to tell. Michael sat across from her in the command center the next morning, before anyone else had arrived. She told him about the organization, a group that had been operating in the defense contracting space for almost 15 years, moving money and intelligence and personnel through legitimate companies as cover, using those companies to access classified government systems without triggering the oversight structures that would have caught them otherwise. They were not a foreign intelligence operation. They were domestic, former military, former contractors, former government officials who had decided at some point that the rules they had sworn to uphold were obstacles rather than boundaries. She told him about the mission 7 years ago, the mission that his unit had run. The target had been a data cache, an archive of communication records that the organization had been building for years, documenting their operations in enough detail that exposure would have ended them entirely. The mission had been designed to retrieve and preserve that cache's evidence. His unit had been the retrieval team. The mission had gone wrong because someone had told the organization it was coming. The data cache was destroyed before his unit reached it. His unit had been compromised, targeted, and eliminated. The organization had survived because their insider, the person who had warned them, had made sure of it. Who was the insider? Michael asked. Mary looked at him. It was someone inside this company, she said. Someone who had been working with the organization for years before the mission. Someone who understood what the data cache contained and what its retrieval would mean for everyone who had ever cooperated with that organization. Michael looked at her for a long moment. Is that person still here? No, she said. They died 4 years ago. Natural causes. She paused. But their network is still here. The system of access and contacts they built over the years. It didn't die with them. It went dormant for a while, and then someone else picked it up. Briggs, Michael said. We think Briggs is a node, she said, not the center. He's being used the same way those 16 employee accounts are being used, as a layer of distance between the organization and their actual access point. Then who's the center? Mary was quiet for a moment. That's what the ground team is trying to find out, she said. That's what this whole operation has been building toward for 18 months. The ground team is the final piece. They're in position to surveil a physical location that the organization uses for command coordination. If they can document what moves through that location over the next 72 hours, we have enough to go to a federal oversight committee that exists outside the standard chain. Outside the standard chain, because the standard chain might be compromised, Michael said. Yes. Michael looked at the screen that showed the backup communication channel. Still active. Still stable, for now. You said, there's something you should have told me the first day, he said. Mary looked at the table. Then she looked at him. The organization's current objective, the reason they've been working to compromise our relay system, the reason they needed the ground team blind, isn't just about protecting their network from exposure. What is it about? They've identified a target, she said. A physical target. Something they intend to use the relay system to direct our orbital array at. She stopped. The array is not just a communication and observation system. You know that. You were briefed on the secondary capability when your unit received mission support from this company 7 years ago. Michael was very still. The orbital array. The directed energy capability. He had known it existed. He had known it was classified. He had not thought about it in years because it had not been relevant to his current life. "What's the target?" he asked. Mary reached into the folder in front of her and took out a single page. She set it on the table and pushed it toward him. It was a coordinate map, a location in Virginia, a civilian location. Michael looked at the map. He looked at the pin that marked the target coordinates. He looked at the address printed beneath the pin. The address was 6 blocks from his apartment. The target was Meadowbrook Elementary School. Michael sat at the table and did not move for 30 seconds. He was a disciplined person. He had been trained to receive bad information without showing its effect on him. Because in the field, the moment you showed that a piece of information had affected you was the moment you became predictable. He had practiced this for years. He was very good at it. But 30 seconds was what he needed to put the information somewhere he could function around it. Elizabeth went to Meadowbrook Elementary School. She was there right now. She was in her 2nd grade classroom with Mrs. Patterson, probably drawing something in her notebook, because Mrs. Patterson let the students draw during independent reading time, and Elizabeth always chose drawing over reading given the option. "When," he said, his voice was level, "the trigger parameter that Briggs's account has been building toward, based on the access pattern Morrow analyzed, it's set to activate within 48 hours. 48 hours. Yes. And the coordinate data for the school, where did they get that?" Mary's expression changed. It became the expression of someone who was about to deliver the part of the information that they had been most reluctant to deliver. "The targeting data was sourced from the school district enrollment database," she said. "Specifically, from a record that was cross-referenced against a residential address." She paused. "The residential address was in a routine municipal records inquiry that our network flagged 2 days ago as an unusual access. The inquiry was filed under a fabricated identity, but the address it was looking for, the address it found, was yours." Michael looked at her. "They found Elizabeth," he said. "Yes. They found her through the school district database. They found your address first," Mary said. "Then they found the school. The order is important. This wasn't a random target selection. This was specific." Michael stood up. "I need to get her out of that school right now." "Sit down," Mary said, not unkindly but firmly. "If you go pull her out yourself, you signal them. They have someone watching. If Meadowbrook Elementary suddenly dismisses a student early on the morning after our relay system blocked their trigger attempt, they'll know the attempt was detected. They'll move the timeline. They'll find another way." Michael sat down. He sat down because she was correct. "What do you suggest?" he said. "I have the ability to issue a district-wide maintenance closure notification through the school board's administrative system. It's a routine code. Every school gets them. They don't raise flags, and they mean students are sent home through normal channels with no visible urgency." She held his gaze. "I can have it issued within the hour. Elizabeth will be on her school bus before 10. You can pick her up at the bus stop as normal. Nothing unusual. Nothing that reads as a response." Michael looked at the coordinate map, still sitting on the table. "And the 48-hour window," he said. "That's why I'm telling you all of this right now instead of waiting," Mary said. "The only way to prevent the trigger from firing is to get inside Briggs's gateway and push a countercommand before it activates. I can't do that from the outside. Morrow can't do it. The countercommand requires authentication from inside the relay architecture itself, and the architecture has a biometric lock on the final authorization level." "A biometric lock?" "Yes." "Who does the biometric belong to?" Mary looked at him. "Your unit built the relay architecture. The classified version, the version that was adapted for the orbital array targeting system. They built the biometric lock into it as a safeguard, so that the final authorization could only come from someone the unit trusted." She paused. "That biometric is key to the unit commander." Michael looked at the table. "That's you," Mary said. "Your biometric is the only key that can push a countercommand through that lock." Outside, 6 blocks away, Elizabeth was in her classroom. She was probably drawing something. She was probably happy. She did not know anything about relay architectures or orbital arrays or organizations that moved through defense companies like water through a cracked foundation. She was 7 years old, and she liked triangular sandwiches, and she had told Michael last week that she wanted to be a veterinarian when she grew up. Issue the school closure, Michael said, and get me into the relay architecture. I need to understand exactly what the countercommand requires before I attempt it. Mary picked up her phone. Michael looked at the coordinate map one more time. Then he turned it face down. He had 48 hours. He had been in worse situations with less. The difference was at this time, everything he was protecting fit in a yellow lunchbox. Elizabeth came home at 9:52 that morning. Michael was at the bus stop when the bus arrived. Elizabeth climbed off with her backpack and her yellow lunchbox and walked up to him with the expression of someone who was mildly suspicious that something unusual was happening, but had decided to reserve judgment. School closed, she said. Mrs. Patterson said there was a water problem. Michael said. He was, after all, maintenance. Elizabeth accepted this. Can we get pancakes? They got pancakes. Michael sat across from her in a booth at the diner 2 blocks from their apartment and watched her cut her pancakes into triangles. Because triangles tasted better, always triangles. And he told himself that the 48-hour window was manageable and that he had been in more difficult situations, and that the plan he and Mary Jenks had outlined that morning was solid. He told himself all of this, and he mostly believed it, except for the part he had not told Mary yet. The part that had occurred to him 40 minutes into his analysis of the relay architecture that morning, when he had looked at the biometric lock specification and understood something that changed the shape of everything. The biometric lock was not keyed to the unit commander's current biometric data. It was keyed to a sample that had been collected when the lock was installed 7 years ago, when the relay architecture was being built. 7 years ago, Michael had not been the unit commander. He had been the second in command. The unit commander, the person whose biometric was in the lock, was a man named Sergeant Major Frank Aldis, who had been leading the mission when it went wrong and who, unlike Michael, had not walked out of it. Or so Michael had always believed. Frank Aldis was listed as killed in action in the same report that listed Michael as killed in action. Michael had accepted this because he had watched Frank go down in the final stage of the mission, and he had not had the time or the ability to confirm anything beyond what he had seen. But the biometric lock had been installed after the mission went wrong. Michael knew this because the relay architecture's version history was right there in the system logs, and the biometric lock installation was time-stamped 4 months after the mission date, which meant that when the lock was installed, someone had used Frank Aldis's biometric data to key it, which meant Frank Aldis had either been alive 4 months after the mission to provide that data in person, or someone had retained a biometric sample from him and used it posthumously to install the lock. Michael had spent 30 minutes trying to determine which of those was true, and at the end of those 30 minutes, he had picked up Mary Jenks's direct line. He had not asked her about Frank. He had asked her something else first. He had asked her for the sealed personnel file for every member of his unit. Not the report she had written, but the original files, the ones that existed before the report. She had hesitated. Then she had said she could have them to him by noon. Now it was 10:15 in the morning. He was eating pancakes with his daughter. He had the files sitting on his phone in an encrypted transfer that he had not opened yet. He opened them while Elizabeth was coloring on the paper placemat the diner provided for children. The files were 4 of them, for members of his unit, including himself. 3 had the standard terminated killed notation and a date. His had the same notation, same date, crossed out and replaced with notation he had never seen before. Asset relocated, civilian reintegration, file sealed. The 4th file was Frank Aldis. Frank Aldis's file had a different notation than the other 3. It did not say killed. It did not say relocated. It said retained, specialized utilization, ongoing. Michael looked at that notation for a long time. Elizabeth finished coloring a duck yellow and moved on to a frog, which she made purple because she said frogs should be allowed to be whatever color they wanted. Retained, specialized utilization, ongoing. It meant Frank was alive. It meant Frank had been kept, not by the government that had buried them all, but by someone who had used that burial as cover to redirect him. 7 years of Frank Aldis working for an unknown principal under a classification level deep enough that Michael, even after 6 years inside a defense facility, had never come across a trace of it. And the biometric lock on the relay architecture's final authorization level had been installed using Frank's data, which meant that whoever held Frank also had the ability to either authorize or block any countercommand that was pushed through the system. The organization's plan was not just to fire the trigger. The plan was to make sure that when the trigger was ready to fire, there was no one who could stop it, because the only key that could stop it was in their possession. Michael put his phone in his pocket. He looked at Elizabeth, who was making the frog aggressively purple. "Lizzie," he said. She looked up. "If I had to go somewhere important tonight," he said, "and Mrs. Kowalski from next door came to stay with you, would that be okay?" Elizabeth considered this. Does she have to make dinner? She can make dinner or order pizza. "Pizza," Elizabeth said immediately and went back to the frog. Michael called Mary Jenks. She answered on the first ring. "The files," he said. "Frank Aldis. What do you know?" A pause that went on 2 seconds longer than a pause should go when someone does not know what you are talking about. "Tell me what you found," she said. "Retained. Specialized utilization. Ongoing," Michael said. "That's what his file says. The organization has him. And his biometric is the key on the relay lock, which means I cannot push the counter command without him." Another pause. "I know," Mary said. Michael was quiet. "I have known for approximately 2 years," she said. "I found out through a contact inside the oversight system that Frank had been redirected. The organization identified him before the mission. They had been in contact with him for months before it went wrong. They offered him an exit, not a clean exit, a controlled one. He would disappear. They would protect him, and he would continue to operate in a specific capacity for them." She stopped. "I believe he accepted because he had no other option that he could see. He had a family. He was being threatened. I'm not in a position to judge the decision." "He has a child," Michael said. It was not a question. It had become very clear very suddenly. In the way things become clear when you have been holding a piece of information that fits perfectly with another piece of information you have had for years. "Yes," Mary said. Her voice was different now. It had a quality to it that he had not heard before. "A daughter, born 6 weeks before the mission. Frank's wife died in childbirth. He had arranged for the child to be placed with family while he was deployed, but when the mission ended and he disappeared, the placement was lost. The child went into the state system." Michael was very still. "Where is the child now?" he asked, although he already knew the answer. "We don't know," Mary said. "The file on the placement was corrupted in a system migration 3 years after the mission. The child's name was changed by whoever assumed guardianship. She could be anywhere." Michael looked at Elizabeth. Elizabeth had finished the frog. She was now working on a sun, which she was making orange and pink because she said suns didn't have to be yellow all the time. He had known, when he walked out of the wreckage of that mission with a 6-week-old baby, that the child was Frank's. He had known her mother was gone and her father was declared dead, and there was no family placement that was on hold because the family contact information in the mission paperwork was already corrupted by the time he reached anyone who could help. He had made a decision. He had made it in less than a day, and he had never for one moment questioned it. He had named her Elizabeth because it was his mother's name, and because she needed a name that was hers. But Elizabeth was Frank Aldis's daughter, and Frank Aldis was alive, working under duress for an organization that had just targeted the school she attended, using her location as a mechanism to control Michael. The organization had not found Elizabeth randomly. They had found her because they knew what Frank knew. And Frank knew that his daughter existed and that Michael had her, because Frank was the only other person from that mission who was alive and who understood what had happened at the end of it. Frank had told them. Not willingly. Michael was certain of that. But under the kind of pressure that the organization was capable of applying, Frank had eventually told them what they needed to know to find Michael. And now they had used that information to point an orbital weapon at his daughter's school. Michael looked at Elizabeth one more time. Then he looked away. "I need to speak to Frank," he said. "That's not possible through conventional." "I'm not asking about conventional channels," Michael said. "You've been working this operation for 18 months. You have the ground team in the field. You know where Frank is, or you know how to find out. That's why you've been building this operation, not just to expose the organization, to get Frank out. A long silence. There's an encrypted channel, Mary said finally. A direct line that was established for communication between Frank and the oversight contact I mentioned. He's used it twice. We've been monitoring it. Can you open it? If Frank is on the other end, yes. Open it, Michael said, and give me an hour with my daughter first. He put the phone in his pocket. He ordered more coffee and a hot chocolate for Elizabeth and spent the next 50 minutes sitting across from a purple frog and an orange and pink sun and a little girl who ate her pancakes in triangles and did not know that the world was much more complicated than it appeared from where she was sitting. He did not tell her anything. There was nothing to tell her yet that she could understand. There would be time for that later. Not today, maybe not for years, but later when she was old enough to hold it. He paid the check. They walked home. He called Mrs. Kowalski. Then he went to Regis Defense Solutions and stood in front of a communication terminal in a secure room that Mary Jenks had authorized for his access, and he waited. The channel opened at 2 in the afternoon. Frank Aldis's voice came to the speaker exactly as Michael remembered it. Direct, careful, with a specific cadence of someone who chose words after considering their weight. It had not changed, except that it was carrying more weight than it used to. "Mike," Frank said. "Yeah," Michael said. "I'm sorry," Frank said. "About the school. About all of it. They used what I told them in 2019. I thought," he stopped, "I thought they were going to use it to leverage you, not to target her. I didn't understand what they were building until last week." "I know," Michael said. "You need the counter-command." "Yes, I can push it," Frank said. "My biometric is in the lock. I can authorize it remotely from here if you feed me the current relay architecture signature. But there's a condition." "What condition?" "After it's pushed, they'll know it came from me," Frank said. "I'll have approximately 12 hours before they understand that I've turned. I need extraction in those 12 hours. Full extraction, new identity, new location, clean. The kind of thing this company and its government contacts can arrange if they're motivated. I'll arrange it," Mary Jenks said from beside Michael. She had been in the room the whole time. Frank could hear her voice. A pause from Frank. "Mary," he said. He did not say it warmly. He said it the way you say the name of a person who made decisions that cost you everything, and who you have spent years being angry at, and who you have not finished being angry at, but who is currently the only person in the room who can give you what you need. "Frank," she said. In her voice was something that was not quite apology, and not quite the absence of apology. Something more complicated than either. 12 hours, he said. Full extraction. And there's one more thing. "Tell me," Michael said. "My daughter," Frank said. "After extraction, after everything is clean, I want to know where she is. I'm not asking for custody. I'm not asking for anything complicated. His voice stopped for a moment. 7 years is a long time. I just want to know she's alive." Michael looked at the speaker. He thought about a purple frog and an orange and pink sun and triangular pancakes and a note in a lunchbox that said, "You are the best thing I ever did." He thought about what it meant to tell a man who had been kept and controlled and used for 7 years that his daughter was alive and healthy and currently at home eating pizza with the next-door neighbor because she had specifically requested it. He thought about how much Elizabeth did not yet know and how much of it she deserved to know eventually and what the right way was to give it to her. "She's alive," Michael said. "She's good. She's really good." Frank did not say anything for a moment. "Okay," he said finally. His voice was rougher than it had been. "Feed me the architecture signature." Frank said, "Let's end this." Michael fed him the signature. Frank input his biometric authentication through the channel. The relay architecture's final authorization lock opened. Michael pushed the counter command through it. On the screen above the terminal, the trigger parameter dissolved. The 48-hour countdown went blank. The orbital array recalibrated to its standard observation coordinates. The targeting data for Meadowbrook Elementary School was overwritten and gone. The whole thing took 6 minutes. Then it was over. Thomas Briggs was arrested by federal authorities at 7 that evening while he was eating dinner. He was a second arrest. The first had been an executive at a partner company who had been the primary access architect for the organization's network penetration. The ground team surveillance data, transmitted in full over the stabilized satellite channel, provided enough for the oversight committee that Mary had been building toward for 18 months. The organization did not collapse in a day. Organizations like that never do. But the case against them was open, and it was real, and it was in the hands of people who were outside the compromise chain, which meant it was going to move forward. Frank Aldis was extracted on schedule. Michael did not know where he went. That was the point. 3 weeks later, Michael was on the 7th floor replacing a thermostat that actually needed replacing this time, and his phone buzzed. Not the direct line, the personal number. The text was from an unknown sender. It said, "She sounds like her mother. Thank you for taking care of her." Michael stood in the 7th floor corridor for a moment. Then he typed back, "She cuts everything into triangles. Thought you should know." He pocketed the phone and went back to the thermostat. Downstairs in the command center, Lieutenant Kalen Vance was running a training exercise with the new communication protocols that Michael had helped implement. Protocols that used the Ghost Channel relay architecture openly now, written into the official system documentation, because the organization that had tried to bury that knowledge no longer had the power to keep it buried. On the 14th floor, in her office, Mary Jenks was on the phone with the Oversight Committee. She had been on the phone with them most days for the past 3 weeks. The conversation was slow and careful, and there were layers of legal protection and classification review involved that were going to take months to resolve. But the conversation was happening. That was what mattered. And 6 blocks away from Regis Defense Solutions, in a second-grade classroom at Meadowbrook Elementary School, a girl named Elizabeth was at her desk. She was not drawing in the margins of her notebook today. She was doing math, which she was surprisingly good at for someone who had once spent 20 minutes explaining to her father why 4 triangles were better than 1 square, even if they were the same total amount of pancake. She did not know about orbital arrays or relay architectures, or the 48-hour window that had closed quietly around her like a hand and then opened again without her ever feeling it. She knew that her dad picked her up every day. She knew that her sandwich was always cut right. She knew that there was always a note in her lunchbox. Today's note said, "You are exactly where you are supposed to be." She folded it up and put it in her pocket and went back to her math. Outside, the world continued its complicated work of being the world. Inside, a little girl in a second-grade classroom did her addition problems and did not know that she was loved in ways that were larger than she could yet understand by more people than she yet knew existed. She would find out eventually, but not today. Today was just a regular Tuesday, and regular Tuesdays were, all things considered, exactly what she needed most. The most powerful thing a person can carry is a skill they never advertise. Michael Smitherman spent 7 years being the man nobody looked at, and that invisibility was not weakness. It was strategy. He did not need a title, a uniform, or a seat at the table to matter. When the moment came, he walked into a room full of trained officers and generals and solved in 45 seconds what none of them could solve at all. Not because he was lucky, but because he had spent years staying sharp and staying quiet and staying ready. The lesson is this. Your value does not expire just because the world stops acknowledging it. Your skills do not disappear just because you stop using them publicly, and the person most prepared to handle a crisis is rarely the one with the biggest title in the room. It is the one who kept learning, kept practicing, and kept showing up, even when nobody was watching. Before you go, let me ask you something, Dot. If this story kept you listening until now, why not subscribe? A lot of people watch. A lot of people enjoy. But most never click that button. Don't just be a viewer. Be part of this. Like the video if it hit. Share it with someone who'd love it. Subscribe so you don't miss what's next. And drop a comment telling me your favorite part of the story. I really want to know what stood out to you though, and be honest. Do you want part 2?